What is it about numbers? What do they tell us? Do they help us understand? One woman goes missing, then another and another. For a long time, only those who know and love them pay attention, until the numbers start to add up. February 2002. The biggest serial murder investigation in Canadian history begins on a farm just outside Vancouver. By this time, more than 60 women are officially missing from the streets of the city's downtown east side. For 2 years, hundreds of forensic investigators sift through tons of earth and debris from the farm, searching for traces of missing women. Murder charges are laid against the owner of the farm. First 2, then 7, then 15. Then in February 2004, the 23rd woman is identified from DNA found in the earth taken from the farm. But like all the others, she is much more than a number. She has a name. Her name is Daleen Kay. There is nothing left now at the farm to tell us what really happened here. They say DNA carries the genetic footprint of a person, the essence of who we are. But what does it really tell us about anyone? For me, finding Dawn's DNA raised more questions than it gave answers. Who was she, and how did we lose her? Like Dawn, I too am a Native woman, and for me her story is part of a much bigger picture. They say more than 500 Native women have gone missing or been murdered across Canada in the past 20 years. I need to put a human face to what's happened to so many of my sisters. And it starts with finding Dawn. These are the streets where Dawn spent her final years and where she disappeared. Vancouver's downtown east side is one of Canada's poorest neighborhoods, and it has more than its share of homelessness, drug addiction, prostitution, and crime. For the women who vanished from this community, life here was a daily struggle, and they did what they had to do to survive. Each of them had a story, and like Dawn, most of them started out somewhere else. I'm going to Chilliwack to meet Dawn's brother, Ernie Cray, a longtime activist for Aboriginal rights in BC. Dawn came from the Stalo Nation, whose traditional territory starts at the mouth of the Fraser River and extends deep into the canyons of the coastal mountains.
I think all of us are quite proud of our tribal ancestry. We're the Stalo people. The people of the river. We're a fishing community. Community that has lived here, we're told, based on all the archaeological evidence that's been surfaced over the past few decades, probably for as long as 9,000 years, certainly since the last ice age. This is the place we call home, and we grew up here.
Ernie describes his family as being at the eye of the hurricane that came with European settlement. Within 4 generations, the Stalo lost much of what they held dear: their land, their livelihood, and even their children, who were taken away first to residential schools and then to foster homes. Dawn's sister Lorraine remembers the day they lost their father, a day that had disastrous consequences for all the Crey children, but especially for Dawn.
I was playing in the front yard with Dawn, and our dad was there. And I remember we're all running around, just playing. Our father was playing, and then he just collapsed. And he just laid there, and Dawn ran to him. And she put his head in her lap. And I was much younger, and she was screaming for her mother. But her mother didn't acknowledge the screams because she thought we were just playing.
Within a year, Dawn and her siblings were taken from their mother and put in separate foster homes throughout the Fraser Valley. Dawn and her older sister Faith were placed in the same foster home, and what they experienced there stayed with them for life.
Even Dawn, the last couple of months that I spent with her 10 years ago, she would still talk about these experiences. Why? You know, somebody in their late 20s, early 30s, why would this still be important? Why would a tear come to her eye when she talked about these kinds of experiences at the hands of her foster parents? And her older sister Faith, who was in the same foster home, why is it that at 1:30 in the morning she'd phone me from Edmonton before she died on the streets? Dawn's older sister. Why would she phone me in the 1:30 in the morning from Edmonton and talk about these experiences to me, and insisted that I tell her I love her, at 1:30 and 2 in the morning? Yeah, it hurts. And yes, it makes me angry. And what could I do about it? Who could I hold accountable for the kind of experiences they went through?
Dawn was eventually moved to a second foster family, the Weebs, who loved and cared for her as one of their own. Though she spent several happy years there, it wasn't enough to ease the yearning she had for her own lost family.
I met Dawn when I was walking through Woolworths. She was inside a little photo stand, and she came, ripped open the curtains, and then she jumped out, and then she jumped right in front of me. She had like a, Lorraine, you're my sister. Wow. I still remember her bright eyes and her long hair and the way she leaped out. It was like, and then she looked so happy to see me.
The two sisters soon left their foster homes and set off for the bright lights of Vancouver. They had no home and few prospects, but as long as they were together, they could look out for each other. But when Lorraine decided to return to Chilliwack, Dawn stayed in the city, and it was then that their lives took very different turns.
She became lonely, penniless, till she met up with a girl they befriended, and she helped Dawn put her out on the street. Dawn didn't like that. She was actually very scared. She didn't want to do it at all. So she had problems. Her first time she had problems. She wouldn't do anything. She just left. She She just couldn't do it. She couldn't turn a trick, as they call it. She went back to the friend that introduced her to that type of life. Introduced her to drugs and told her this would make you comfortable. And it did make her comfortable. And then she started tricking. And then, well, just that experimenting with that drug, it led to an addiction.
Dawn was a familiar face in the downtown East Side for more than 20 years. In the months before she disappeared, she was living in a hotel near Main and Hastings. But she was on a methadone program and trying to get her life back on track. By this time, Lorraine was back in Vancouver, and she'd call Dawn every couple of weeks, and they'd arranged to meet. They shared their last meal together on this park bench. But a few weeks later, when Dawn didn't return her calls, Lorraine knew that something was wrong.
There was no sign of her anywhere. She wasn't going to any of the doctors down there anymore. So it became apparent to me that, yes, indeed, something has happened to her.
It was more than 3 years from the time she disappeared until Dawn's DNA was finally identified in material taken from the farm. Her brother Ernie became an advocate for the families of all the missing and murdered women. But he's been particularly outspoken about the fact that almost half of them were Aboriginal.
I think that, and I've said this before, if these women had been from a wealthier part of Vancouver, say Kerrisdale or the west end of Vancouver, some upscale, tonier neighborhood in Vancouver, and involved largely white women, if I can put it that way, that the investigation would have been thoroughgoing, it would have been well-financed, and there would have been a lot of police officers, Johnny on the spot, and we would have very likely had a suspect in jail far earlier than was the case where all of these missing women are concerned. Not all of the missing women are Aboriginal, but what they have in common, the non-Aboriginal women that have vanished from the streets, in common with the Aboriginal women is that they were all poor, living in a poor community in Vancouver, the downtown East Side, probably drug dependent, and having to resort to prostitution to deal with their habituation to street narcotics. Those are not powerful people in this society. We can't pretend they are, when we can't pretend that the police are equally responsive to different parts of the society.
Prosecutors are proceeding with murder charges for 26 of the 67 women on Vancouver's missing women list. But Dawn's case is not among them. The news that there was not enough of Dawn's DNA to proceed with murder charges has left Lorraine with still more questions.
Maybe my sister died there. Maybe she didn't. I have to still stand up for her and find out exactly what has happened. And I'm not going to sit down anymore. And somebody has to be held responsible for her. Not just, oh, well, she's just another dead Indian woman, another woman that's passed us by unnoticed. So who cares? I don't care. So I care. I love Dawn, and it's up to me and my family to stand by her and let it not be forgotten.
Dawn was last seen at Hastings in Maine. And every year on Valentine's Day, hundreds of people gather here for the annual Women's Memorial March. The march began 15 years ago with the murder of a Coast Salish woman whose family came down here to do a cleansing ceremony at the place where her remains were found. Since then, it's become a day to remember and honor all the women who have disappeared or been murdered in this neighborhood. Marlene Trick is one of the Native women who organized the march each year.
There's so many women that are missing on the murdered and missing women's list. So many women had left boyfriends and friends and sisters and loved ones, and they had no real way to express their grief, because, you know, death is a constant thing that happens in this community. That's why the march is one way for everyone in the community to come together to grieve as a group and, you know, express their, you know, community love for all of these women. The Women's Memorial March is and has been a community effort, and the women organize the march, but the men also participate in various ways to help us. I can still remember Ernie coming into the Women's March in, I believe it was 2000, 2001, and asking people in the community if they saw his sister, and putting up posters and just asking if anyone saw her, if they could contact him. And it's just, you know, so difficult, because that's the reality for many families, that they came into this community searching for their sisters and their daughters and loved ones, you know, with no answers, absolutely no answers.
My sister's only been gone a short time, and my two sisters and I dearly loved her. I can't say how strongly I appreciate everyone coming together on February the 14th, Valentine's Day, you know, the day that we express our love for one another wherever we are in society. I'm so glad that people like Marlene and the others that have organized this event have not forgotten the women that have vanished from the streets of the downtown east side, haven't forgotten their need for services and support, and haven't forgotten families like mine and the many other families that have come here today.
I come here today because I have over 50 friends on the missing women's list. I come here today because I want to honor these women whose friendship with me in the 16 years that I lived down here helped me hang on and get a better life. I'm just so compelled to come here and just speak about my friendships and how they made a difference for me, and that they helped hang on to me when I wasn't hanging on to myself.
The murdered and missing women from this community were daughters, sisters, aunties, and friends. But they were also mothers, and they've left behind daughters of their own.
My name is Anne-Marie Livingston, and my mother is a missing woman on the missing women's list. She's been missing approximately 13 years I'd like to introduce my sister, Donna Lee. Thank you for having us here today, and I'd like to thank the Coast Salish for welcoming us into their territory. To come all this way with my son and my sister and her son was a big stepping stone for our family in acknowledging and honoring our mother. As daughters of a missing woman named Elsie, we now have children of our own. However, these children will never know their grandmother. She's missing. And I'd also like to point out that just because the women that haven't been found are still missing doesn't mean that they're not important.
This is a day to remember all the women in this community whose lives and deaths were largely ignored because of who they were, where they lived, and what they did to survive. Yet Dawn and the other Native women we've lost here are only a fraction of the hundreds of missing and murdered Native women across Canada. Not all of these women were addicted, or worked the streets, or lived in places like the downtown East Side. Some of them were students, whose only lifeline was a remote northern highway. The Yellowhead Highway, or Highway 16, is a thread that runs across Western Canada, from the prairies to the Pacific. Here in northern BC, it's the main road for big rigs and tourists heading from Prince George in the interior to Prince Rupert on the coast. It's also the only link between dozens of small communities all along the way. Since the early 1990s, at least 9 young women have disappeared or been killed along this lonely stretch of highway. All except one were Aboriginal.
Ngalawan, I'm Lynn Trebasket. Highway 29 between Chetwynd and Tumbler Ridge is closed following a road collapse. Mike Minichel of Highways...
Lynn Trebasket is a local radio host at CFNR in Terrace, and she knows only too well the realities and the dangers faced by Native women in the north.
I don't like to travel back and forth on Highway 16 unless I absolutely have to. And when I do travel, I do my best to make sure that my vehicle is in tip-top shape because I cannot afford to have a breakdown, to get stuck anywhere. Traveling with a child, it's just, for me, it's just too scary. So I go into debt to keep my truck up to speed or keep my vehicle in good shape. Yet at the same time, I'm lucky that I have the opportunity to do that. A lot of the Native women who work or who live in this area, and then especially in the West, don't have jobs. They don't have transportation. I know a pregnant woman, all through her pregnancy, was hitchhiking on the road. She has needs. She's got to have food. She's got to have, medicine or whatever. She hitchhikes. Her baby's born. She's still hitchhiking. A lot of the Native women hitchhike.
Ramona Wilson disappeared in June 1994 and was last seen hitchhiking on Highway 16 to see her boyfriend. Her mother, Mattie Wilson, waited almost a year for news of the girl her family called Muncie.
Because she was my youngest one, and she was my little baby girl. She was 16. She was just getting out into the world. And she was the love of our life. My oldest daughter, Brenda, was so ecstatic when she was born, because she finally had a little sister, because she has 4 brothers. Yeah. She was always giggling, and she was always joking with us. She kept the house just like in laughter all the time, just about, it was a happy house when she was there.
The summer days are long in the north, and Ramona disappeared on a beautiful June evening, much like this one. It was high school graduation night in a typical small town, and like all her friends, Ramona had plans. So she asked her sister Brenda for a ride.
I told her that I couldn't do it at the time, and she said she'd be in town, so not realizing that, she was going to actually hitchhike, and she didn't say she was going to, so it was I have guilt and stuff because I wish I had given her a ride. So that was a Saturday, June 11th, 11 years ago. And she didn't call, so my mom started calling to different friends and stuff, and there was no response. No one had seen her, and so she put it on the radio to tell her to phone home, and there was still no response. So Monday we asked the police to help us try to look for her, and then we were told that we had to wait. I think it was a couple of days, and we had no idea what to do.
Ramona's body was discovered 10 months later in dense forest just off Highway 16. Every June 11th, on the anniversary of her disappearance, her family and friends walked the 2 miles from where she was last seen to the place where she was found.
And you just ran out from town?
Yeah. I missed last year's walk, so I owed her one. I did it in 15 minutes, and I'm not a runner. I'm a smoker. But it was worth it. Here's to you, Ramona.
I take part in this every year ever since Maddie started doing her thing for Ramona every year to raise awareness, that it's still unsolved, all the women that have gone missing on Highway 16, and no one knows who hurt Ramona and took her away from this world. And I have a daughter of my own, and so I can't imagine what their family is going through.
My name is Constable Eric Corona, and I felt it important to be here for the family and the friends of the family. I just told them that we are still supporting them. Being Aboriginal myself, that to show that Aboriginal people, coming together with the RCMP to work towards stopping this type of thing from happening again.
So take your time, you don't need to run like Lorna. But we really appreciate you all coming out here today. And we'll start going 2 by 2.
And the mosquito spray, we have mosquito spray here too.
It helps us feel closer to her and knowing what her last steps were when she left this world. And it's a healing process for us. And to have the support from other people makes it even better, gives us strength to, go on and try to find answers of what happened to my sister.
We're showing people that we are not afraid. We will never be afraid. That we are here, we'll always be here. If it's not me, it will be my children. And if it's not my children, it will be my grandchildren. and if it's not my grandchildren, it will be my great-grandchildren. So I'm fighting for the loved ones. I'm fighting for the unsolved murders. I'm fighting for everything that I have. I never back down. I will always be here. This face will always be here. Every June 11th, they will see me on Yellich Road, because I will let them know that we shall never forget the loved ones that were murdered along Highway 16, on the Highway of Tears.
Ramona's body was eventually found, but several of the young women who disappeared along the highway vanished without a trace. Lynn Terbasket helped coordinate one of the searches from the CFNR newsroom.
The Pacific Northwest, our terrain is just like wrinkled up old skin, and it's just bumpy and hilly, and the mountains are huge. And there's so many cut blocks and clear cut and roads that go into the mountains, deep into the mountains. And, you know, it's impossible to search every road. It's impossible to search every gully and every ditch because it's so huge. You know, it's a big place. And so that's how our search ended. It snowed and we couldn't look anymore. But the effort put into that was tremendous. I've never seen anything like it. It was an amazing effort. It was not successful, but we tried. And I think that helped to get the message out there that, hey, it's not safe, be careful, look after yourself, things happen.
Things do happen to Native women in this country, no matter where we live, our circumstances, or our lifestyles. And when they do, the authorities are often slow to act. Whether it's in Vancouver, on the highway, or in Saskatoon, where 26-year-old Daleen Bosse mysteriously vanished after a night out with friends.
I guess my daughter used to like singing. These guys were telling me that she used to sing a lot at these premises where they have karaoke. I know when she was growing up, I taught her how to sing, play guitar. We used to sing gospel songs. Maybe I taught her too good. I wish I could hear her sing today.
Daleen was a young mother and university student who was studying to become a teacher. The night she disappeared, she was headed to a conference in downtown Saskatoon. She was last seen leaving this popular nightclub, and her car was found abandoned 2 weeks later. Since then, her parents, Herb and Pauline Muskego, have traveled back and forth across Western Canada, searching for their daughter. But so far, they haven't found her.
And the police, I still believe today that if they would have taken this situation more serious, we would have found her today.
Well, we're here today to search for anything of evidentiary value that might assist us in the investigation of missing person Daleen Bosse. And we have approximately 70 volunteers out here today searching through this area in the hopes of recovering some evidence that will be of assistance to us.
When Daleen first went missing, her file was classified as a missing person file. And it stayed like that until Christmas time, from May until Christmas. No, May until January. this past January. They bumped it to a criminal investigation after January because they waited, the group said, until after Christmas, because that's when they say that people that go missing, that's when they tend to phone home, is during special occasions, holidays and birthdays, things like that. And when she never phoned home, that's when the police moved it to a criminal investigation.
A year is a long, long time, and we're wondering why it took so long for the search to be expanded to this extent when Daleen has been gone so long.
Early in the investigation, there had been several sightings that led various people to believe that Daleen was still alive and was not, maybe not wanting to be necessarily found by individuals. As the investigation went on, these sightings continued, but they became we couldn't substantiate the sightings, which led us to believe, and without her contacting anybody, that it may be more serious than just a person who doesn't want to be contacted by family, police, or whoever.
I think it's become more of a priority to the police now, and we're thankful for that. But I just wish that we would have had more help from them to begin with. But I don't want to say anything that's going to jeopardize the search that's going on right now. We don't want to, make anyone look bad. We just want to find our daughter.
It's the first weekend in May, almost a year after Daleen disappeared.
Team 1, those of you that set up with Team 1, where's my Team 1? Team 1, right here.
Volunteer searchers, friends, and relatives have come from Daleen's home community of Onion Lake and from as far away as northern Saskatchewan and Manitoba. In the bitter cold of a spring snowstorm, they join police and professional search and rescue teams to spend 2 days doing a grid search of an area just outside Saskatoon, near the place where Daleen's car was found.
Okay, the teams have got their assignments so they know where they're going. Team 1 and 2 can literally walk from here and move from here. Team 5 will be hooking up with the van and they'll be transporting you out immediately. And then 4 and then 3. Okay?
My hope comes from my belief in God, and my hope comes in prayers. My hope comes from the people that come to us, offer their words of encouragement, and are pitching in even right now today. And my hope comes in the 50% chance that she's still out there, that she still might show up, that she still might. There's all kinds of scenarios that we can play through in our minds as to where she is. Because we don't have any proof what has happened to her, where she is. We have no proof yet. So this search might give us some clues.
The search is a community effort, and those who can't handle the tough terrain come out to lend moral support. Yvonne House has been a longtime advocate for Native women, children, and families, and she's impressed by what she sees.
It's our people that are out there searching. To me, that's incredible to watch and incredible to see, and knowing that because of the territories, I believe when I think about it and I see some of the older men that are in their 60s and more, 60s plus, those are trappers, so they know what they're doing out here, right?
Despite their best efforts, the search yields no further clues to Daleen's disappearance. At the end of the day, Tom Charles, a tracker from L'Orange, tells the searchers not to be discouraged, but to learn from what they've been through.
Hopefully, things like this that do happen in our communities will somehow not stop, but we can resolve them as soon as possible. Let's not wait 3 weeks. Let's not wait 1 month. Let's not wait 10 hours. Let's not wait 3 hours to ask for help.
But it's sad because there's so many daughters and mothers and sisters and aunts from our territories that is missing in this country. And there's no outcry anywhere. No one is saying, they're missing, find them, where are they? No one's yelling. And we have to learn to do that. And then maybe we'll be able to stop it. We acknowledge that any one of us in this room could be Daleen. Any one of us could go missing.
That ever-present danger seems especially close here on the outskirts of Saskatoon, where in the mid-1990s, the bodies of 3 Native women were found. They were the victims of convicted serial killer John Martin Crawford, who cruised the bars on Saskatoon's 20th Street, looking for women for sex. But they were also victims of widespread attitudes in our society that Native women are easy prey. These attitudes are old and deep, and they can be summed up in one word. Here at the First Nations University in Saskatoon, these students are studying squaw poems.
Women that are in here, do you relate to this poem personally?
Most Native women have been called squaws at one time or another. And for Professor Janice Coos, it's words and images like this that are at the root of so much of the violence against us.
That got your attention when she wrote, "Hey, squaw"?
As a rookie newspaper columnist, Janice wrote about the negative images of Native women in the media. And she was the first to criticize the media coverage of the Crawford murder case.
How I came to be the first Native Affairs columnist was I'd actually marched into their offices one day and said to them, you know, I'm really fed up with the way that, you know, you are presenting images and telling stories about Native people in general. So I began writing columns about, you know, how Native people were represented in the press and about a lot of social justice issues. And then when John Crawford was arrested, you know, they reported the case, they sensationalized the murders in many ways, talking about Crawford more than the victims. And when they did talk about the victims, they talked about them as though they were garbage, as though they didn't matter, as though their lives were insignificant. I identified with them. I made connections with them because I also lived on the street. I worked the streets and I know what it was like. I had violence done to me in much the same way that they did. I was fortunate in many instances that I wasn't killed. I could have been killed.
Janice and I are going to visit places from her past. We both grew up in Regina, but our experiences were very different. This time, I'm going to see the Regina that she knew.
When I first ended up on the street, it was because, I think I was following in the footsteps of my 4 older sisters to begin with. I used to think, you know, they were so finely dressed and they looked so classy and wonderful. And I thought that was great. I thought they must have had a wonderful life because we were so poor. When we lived in Regina, we were really, really, really poor. And I just thought, well, if that's what they're doing, whatever they're doing, that's what I want to do. And I never really figured out what it was they did until I met the person who put me on the street. When I met him, I'd been somebody who was abused, you know, sexually. I'd been raped a few times. I used to think, I didn't call it rape then, so I used to think that that was normal. That's the way you treat Indian women.
When I was growing up in Regina, I knew there were places I just shouldn't go. One of them was South Railway Street. At that time, Regina's Skid Row.
Oh my God, this is it. This is the stroll. This is it.
This is what was the stroll.
This is the side of the street where like the métis and the white players used to have their girls work right here.
Which way should I go, Janice?
Left if you can.
Left if I can.
Yeah. And girls used to work from this corner down to the other corner.
And the railway station is now the casino.
Okay, see here, there used to be two old hotels. This is the one I used to work out of on the right, and then there was one on the left, over here. Right here. So for me, going to university after being down here, you know, being in university was like nothing. It was like kindergarten in many ways, you know. Learning from books was just well, it was a privilege in many ways, but it was also not that much of a struggle. It didn't matter how cold, how hot, how raining, how anything it was. I was out here every day except Sundays. I used to be out here in short skirts and high heels in the middle of winter, freezing.
But you got a day off on Sunday.
Yep.
And what did you do on your day off?
Cleaned house. What else do you do on Sundays?
Janice's family came to Regina from their reserve in the 1960s. She remembers moving into this housing project with dreams of a better future. Dreams that soon turned into nightmares.
I don't think my parents raised whores, and I don't think my parents raised thieves or killers, you know. I don't think they did that. I think the places that we grew up in and the institutions that we were a part of and the city that we lived in, I think a lot of that is responsible, you know, the social kind of environment that we lived in. I think a lot of that is responsible for sending the people to places like Skid Rows. You know, the city was a place of hope. For a lot of Indian people, it was a place that was different from the reserve. It was a place of hope. But I guess for a lot of people, when they came to the city, you know, they couldn't get jobs. My father couldn't get a job for a long time. The only jobs he could get were seasonal laboring jobs. My mother used to scrub floors for rich white people. I remember watching my mom one time. When my parents were drinking, I remember one time my mom getting really drunk. And I remember watching this guy taking my mom into the bedroom and raping her. And not being able to do anything. My sister and I watched it. And he put a knife to our throat. We were just little kids. He was raping my mom and we couldn't do anything. And I had a near-death experience that really made me re-examine myself and rebuild myself. And in the beginning of that rebuilding process, I started to remember my relations I started to remember the stories of my relatives that I grew up hearing. I started to remember the women in my family. And I started to remember the ceremonies and the beliefs and the values and our language and stuff. And I started to rebuild myself as a result of remembering. And then I started thinking about running and about my name, Ekus, man standing above ground. And I remember thinking and feeling the power of my connection to my relatives and thinking they were known for their prowess as runners. And as I ran, I would think about my relatives and I would think about the communities that I grew up in and sometimes think about the pain. But again, you know, that was part of that rebuilding process.
Our connection to this land is something Janice and I both share. Our ancestors came from different Métis communities in the Qu'Appelle Valley. The Métis settlement where Janice played as a child is long gone, but we've come back to see if we can find any traces of the people and places she once knew.
Let's go see what that says. This is it. Go up to the sign here first, Christine, and then we'll come back.
And then there's this cairn.
That is, yeah, that's it. Wow, this is amazing that all this stuff is just gone. It's sad. Wow. Finding the remains of our relatives, eh?
I've wanted to honor my relatives in my work, and I wanted my kids to be able to feel the kinds of things that I used to feel from them when I was a kid. And when I was a kid, of course, I used to feel that there was nobody more special than my grandparents here that lived here. When I used to go down the hill to my grandmother's mother's house, that's whose house it is. When I talk about my Down Crookham, that's my grandmother's mother's house. She lived in a mud shack and she refused to take a house, a government issue house, because she loved that old house that she lived in. You know, you could still see the earth in her house, and she loved that, eh? And that house was made out of mud and straw. And she was strong, though. She was a really strong old woman, eh? And she liked to tell dirty jokes and stuff, eh? I think that's why they didn't like us going down there so much. She didn't like going to church either. Mm-hmm. I almost get shivers standing here, you know, that looking at that mission school. I do. I remember that church. Oh, I have so many memories of that church and that school. That place is like an indoctrination camp. You know, it basically tried to make us into something that we weren't. And at a great price, you know.
Janice paid that price through the violence she witnessed, experienced, and survived. But she's more than a survivor. She's living proof that change is possible.
I'm not unique. There are lots and lots and lots of women like me. That's one thing that should give people hope. I have 2 sons, and I love my sons more than I love my life itself. Now I have 2 grandkids and I have a daughter-in-law, and I love them more than I love my life itself. Because I do. I wanted to ensure that their lives would be better than the life that I lived. I also wanted to show other people that it has to stop. It has to stop the violence. It has to stop. It has to stop. And in my family, I knew it had to stop with me.
Stopping the violence isn't easy, and we can't do it alone. This country's history is steeped in violence against Native people, violence with long-term effects. Native women have been living with these effects for generations. But there are signs that things are starting to change. Faye Blaney has been a powerful voice for Native women on both the national and international stage. She's come home to Vancouver Island to fulfill a lifelong dream of working for her own people. And it's brought her face to face with the ghosts of her own past.
I had fled from here from some really difficult circumstances, a lot of violence and sexual violence, and I landed in the street of Vancouver. But in that time, I think I was really vulnerable. I know I got into the fighting. You know, I used to walk around with a big chain around my waist to hit people with, and I did drugs, and I drank a lot, and yeah, I scrapped a lot. And so I think I was really vulnerable to that experience of being one of the missing women. My mom left when I was about 5 years old, and she lost her husband, my dad, about a year earlier. But she had a permanent bruise on top of her eye, and she was telling me that my father did that to her. And my father really had a reputation of being very, very strong, physically strong as well. And so I can imagine how he used that against her and beat her. So she married and had 4 children immediately. I came quite quick after she got married. I'm the oldest, and then I have a brother and then 2 sisters. And so the youngest one was only 6 months old when my father drowned. And after he drowned, she was being sexually assaulted in her own home. People, like men in the village, would come and break into her house and rape her. From where I sit now as an adult, I recognize that she really had no choice but to try and make her escape. But I spend a lifetime resenting her for doing that. It took me a long time to resolve within myself why she had to leave.
We're leaving Campbell River to visit Church House, the village where Faye spent her early childhood. This is the traditional territory of the Homolko people. For Faye, these lands and these waters are full of the stories she heard as a child. Stories of people and animals who could change into other forms. Stories of transformation.
When I had had enough of the violence and the abuse, I ran away and I covered this whole terrain here. But I climbed these cliffs in points where I couldn't climb any longer. I had to swim. I jumped in the water and I swam to the next beach and I walked some more. You know, when I left here, I was running away. I ran away when I was 13, and I stayed in the city. My education was a part of my liberation, and it took a lot of years, I guess 27 years, to be able to finally come to terms with what happened to me and be able to come back and be that agent of change that no one was in my childhood. And so now when I come back here, I do not feel like that little girl anymore. The victimized, frightened little girl.
Like her mother, Faye fled from the violence that had overtaken a once healthy and self-sufficient community. Violence that came with the destruction of a way of life.
If you were in Church House in the early 60s, you would have seen 2 wharves in the front, and both wharves would have been filled with fishing boats. And not only filled, but they would have been parked double and triple and 4. The community would still be there if it hadn't been for federal policy designed to drive us out of there. People had to catch a certain amount of fish in order to hang on to their licenses. And so the federal fisheries policy around licensing really destroyed the industry for our people. And increasingly, people had no livelihood.
Faye's people built this church and this village with their own hands in the late 1800s. But government policies, residential schools, and the loss of their traditional economy all took their toll. And eventually they were forced to abandon the village altogether. This place still has enormous significance for Faye and her community, and they hope that one day they'll be able to return. But in the meantime, there are still important reasons for Faye to come here.
And who is buried back here of your family?
My granny Emily is the one that I was really very excited about seeing. And she's the one that took me in when my parents were gone. She used to read me the Bible in English.
In English?
Which I never understood a word because I only spoke our language. And I was so close with her. And it just was a huge tragedy when I lost her.
In many ways, Faye's homecoming has been bittersweet. She cares deeply about her relations and her homeland, but the community is fragile, with barely a toehold on the lands that were once theirs.
I think there's a huge collective grief going on in this community. People are not naming what that communal grief is, but we're in a situation where we're landlocked. We have no access to the ocean. The ocean has meant everything to our people. And as a result of that displacement, people are experiencing extreme forms of social problems.
2 recent gang rapes in this new town site have brought home the extent of the problem. No stranger to controversy, Faye has decided to do something about it. What she and several other women are doing here is nothing short of revolutionary. They've all experienced some form of abuse, and they've formed a women's action committee to address the issue of violence on the reserve. Their immediate concern is for the victims, but they know that true healing must involve everyone in the community, young and old, men and women.
We wanted to do a write-up and put it in the newsletter about the procedure of what you should do if you should be raped. Because I think one of the things that they don't know is, they take a bath and then they go and they destroy the evidence. So this is something I think that we need to let the women here on the reserve know. The isolation has kept people in the dark about these kinds of things.
In 10 years from now, things could be exactly the same as they are right now in this community, which means that the same type of sexual abuse and rape, gang rape, and violence can continue to go on in this community. And nothing will change unless we form together, we band together as a community.
In the community and in the different things. It's a huge project of attitudinal shift. It's simple. We just have to turn our worldview completely upside down. That's a whole revolution right there. And I think it's an attitude that's been entrenched throughout our colonial history. It's this attitude that Aboriginal women are nothing, they're no good, they're good for prostitution, and that's all they're good for. And we're human beings, and we expect to be treated as human beings. We expect to be treated with respect. And what that looks like in this community is our leadership acknowledging when there are gang rapes, having policies in place that address gang rapes instead of, you go see the police. Why don't you just go dial 911? You know, it's much more than just a police problem. It requires all of us to respond. And the things that we tolerate today are not the things we tolerated yesterday. Our ancestors would not have stood idly by and sent people off to the police. And I think there are some lessons to be learned from our traditions and our culture. They teach us how we respected women, and we need to reclaim some of our traditions and our culture.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
For Faye, this also means reclaiming Aboriginal rights and title to the land, so that our people have the foundations they need to build a healthier community.
Now that I'm home, there is so much power and so much spirituality in the land and the water. And a part of our spiritual belief is that our ancestors have power and they continue to share that with us. But I know that they're there when I hit the wall on some of the struggles that I'm up against. I think about what they would have said and what they're saying to me now, and I dream about them telling me that I'm doing okay and that they're proud of the work that I'm doing.
I set out on this journey to find Dawn, but I also found Faye. I found Janice. I found the people who strive and search and hope. And on this Saturday afternoon on Highway 16, they've come out to take back the highway. Here at this tiny truck stop near the town of Vanderhoof, I found a committed group of Native and non-Native Canadians. There are activists and students, elders and chiefs, and even the local mayor. They're here today because they know that stopping the violence is everyone's responsibility. The significance of this event is not lost on Bev Jacobs, president of the Native Women's Association of Canada.
I think it's important just to show support to the families and to let them know that they're not alone. I see hope just from coming to these, coming here and seeing people who aren't willing to give up. And I'll never give up. Everything in my life that has occurred, whether it's work-wise or personal-wise or spiritually, has led me to where I am now and helping as much as I can, and even, living through every type of abuse, myself, and knowing, how to recover from that and using that recovery and being able to help others. So that's what I feel my job is now.
At this moment, groups of people just like this one are standing all along a remote 700-kilometer stretch of highway in Canada's north. It's a shared moment of silence to remember all the women lost on Highway 16, and a renewal of hope that by working together, they'll finally find some answers. It's summer now, and Daleen Bosse's parents have still not found their daughter. Yet they, too, have a new sense of hope. I've come back to Saskatchewan to visit them at Onion Lake, where Herb and Pauline have just returned from a 400-kilometer walk to Saskatoon to raise awareness about Daleen and all our missing and murdered women.
I can't stop talking about the walk, of how wonderful it was. It gave us life again. It gave us a purpose in life to continue sharing our story, and hopefully we can help other people that are in the same predicament as we have.
It made me feel like people are actually listening. People are paying attention now. And hopefully it doesn't stop there. People saw the big picture as well. They saw us walking for our daughter, but they realized there's a bigger picture we're looking at, and that is all the Native missing women.
What is it about numbers? We may never know what happened to Dawn, or to so many other women we've lost. But I do know that right across this country, there are people who will not give up hope. We'll continue to honor the dead and learn to take better care of the living. We will search for the missing and call them home. What is it about numbers?